In December of 2016, I downloaded the database of all Ohio registered voters, and I narrowed the field down to folks who cast a ballot in the general election in 2012. As you can see here, I've highlighted folks that voted in the general election. I have also pulled up folks who took or took part in the 2008 general election and the party they affiliated with when they registered as a Democrat or Republican in 2008. When importing that data into the IBM i2 Analyst's notebook, I was able to get a very significantly large view of these voters, but I thought it was most applicable to narrow it down to a simple look at clusters, high density, high activity clusters. After filtering out the high density clusters, I began to examine the contents. In this scenario, we see a few people with the McDowell family, and we see the dates and ages, and don't see anything that looks particularly fraudulent. But I think it's most important to get to the higher density clusters where we may find some folks in apartment living. However, what you're going to find is that some of these addresses don't have apartment numbers or suites, so there are strange things to be considered. But when we begin looking at the most highly densely populated areas, we see things like this. An address on Martin Luther King Boulevard, non-mention, non-matching last names, only one person having a separate mailing address indicated by a blue line, and all others having their postal address and their registered voter address being one and the same. And you can see several of these addresses: Vestal Road, Marantha Court, Fifth Avenue, etc. With i2, I was able to export just the addresses to a KML file. I brought the contents into Google Earth, and here we see Lake Erie and the city of Youngstown. As I zoom in closer, we can begin to spread out these addresses. We can do flyovers, but if you will recall, there was an address on Martin Luther King Boulevard that had the highest density of people who had cast votes from that address. I'm going to go ahead and do a fly-in to that address point. I'd like to get a closer look at the facility, so let's go ahead and drop our Street View tool, and this is the address, 962 Martin Luther King Boulevard, Youngstown, Ohio. And as you can see, this is the rescue mission. It's very interesting when we go back and look at the number of people who cast votes from that singular address. We had dozens and dozens voting from that same address. It would be absolutely fascinating to go back and look at whether those folks had voted from any other addresses in past elections, if they had voted by absentee ballot, if the ballots had been completed in the same hand by the same pen, if the absentee requests had been made in the same pen, the same hand, the same forms, or even arrived in the same envelopes. Many anomalies, many possibilities. It just forces one to wonder. As I looked at the other addresses, I did find other interesting facilities. Let's fly around to Marantha Court. It was a little difficult to see what 31 Marantha Court is. But on closer inspection, just with my friends at Google, I discovered that this is Danbridge's Burgundy Manor Rehabilitation Center. Rehabilitation Center. Hmm. So if someone is in a rehabilitation center, what kind of condition are they in? Are they able to cast a vote? Are they coherent? Are they using, I don't know, absentee ballots? Many possibilities. Now I've chosen to fly into another one of our hot addresses on Vestal Road in Youngstown, Ohio. Looks like a fairly large facility. I have two different addresses that did appear in the search. Large complex. Again, let's go a little bit of research here and see what is at that address. And lo and behold, Windsor House at Omni Manor Healthcare Center and Rehabilitation Center. I think I'm seeing a pattern here. Worthy of review, very simple to research. Net time in this investigation less than 30 minutes. If we had the opportunity to connect to other data, I'm sure that we would be looking at significant findings of voter fraud.